Hello.
Hi, how are you?
All right. How are you?
I'm good, how are you?
Good. Looks like we've got Barshan and Vidhi and Kavi and Jess. Welcome. All right. So welcome. So who wants to give an update or have talk about a topic or open the floor? Welcome, Morgan. Okay. Vidhi's just here to view. All right. Ashu is here. Hello. All right. So who wants to start?
I don't have any major updates, but I'll just say it's been a very busy week. Most of my updates, I think, are more for tomorrow. But I'm very. It's been nice to see kind of other things kind of come alive in this next round of things. Oh, I guess the most relevant thing is that we're pretty much done with data and direction interviews. And it's been really, really, really cool to see everybody apply this year. I'm hoping that some of them will be able to come to these meetings too. There will be a lot more people kind of in this general time zone as opposed to it was like California and Europe yesterday.
Oh, yeah.
Last. So that was really tough. But I'm hoping some of them will be able to come to this, or there can be some overlap more strongly with like the open source component or some other things in like society, ethics, tech in general. But incredibly, I don't know the right word. I don't know if proud is really applicable, honored, or like just, I really appreciate everybody who's applied and like tried to do things there. I think there could be some cool overlap with what we want to do here too. So yeah, just that was huge for this week. And then I met with Amanda Nelson. We can talk about that Saturday. And hopefully getting back with Cognition Future stuff too. I had a few people reach out to me also. Some of them here, some of them not here yet, but like people who do want to be part of the open source cohort in general. Mm-hmm. So I hope they do, and I if possible, you can make this meeting. That'd be great. But if you can only make like Saturdays or other times too, there's still ways to do that. So I don't know if you want to spend a little bit of time at some point commenting on like people who want to do that, what they could do. But that came a little bit as well this week.
So. All right. What do you mean what they could do?
Like I think people don't quite know. Like you can participate in the cohort. Like they like that is like I don't think they quite know what it is, or like just reiterating that maybe like just like, hey, you can join us and work on a project or things like that.
All right. I mean we could do that. I'm trying to think of maybe what that would look like. It's kind of hard to say for each person. But I did talk to Kavya, and he's just asking about the different things that we have. He had a project that he proposed for GSoC, but he might want to work on another project, maybe in the area of agents. We have all this agent stuff that we've been working on.
Yeah, and that's kind of like it's sort of it's like, okay, here's I think I referred to some of the like old projects on the old history page too, like even the Bratenberg vehicle stuff, and some of the world models or cybernetics things that we're doing more recently maybe have applications too. But sort of like there's such a rich history of like sort of existing project lines, and then things that could be updated or like remixed too. So if anybody's curious about that or like looking around on the websites and wants to mention it, please just like best thing to do would be mention it in Slack and tag Bradley and me, or if you can find any other people working with the project, you can tag them too. But Bradley would really be your first like, hey, I'm looking at this, and then ask Bradley about it, and I'll help out on that as I can. Okay. So that's the general what I'd advise about that.
Okay, yeah, that's good. So if you do want to work on some things, I would recommend, kind of talking about it in the Slack. You might want to continue your GSoC project, Or you might want to pick something else. You might want to pick something based on what the group is doing. And group by group, I mean there are different groups you can look at and see what they're doing. So there is, of course, the DevoWorm group, and we also have the open source sustainability group, and we have the agent group, which is representational brains and vehicles, and then we have the society ethics and tech group. So we have a number of groups in the lab that you could work on a project that is relevant to that group. And what that project looks like is up to you. It's probably going to be having its own open source repository, but beyond that, it's up to you what that looks like. And you might work on something relevant to what you're interested in. It might be something that's relevant to your coursework in school, or it might be something relevant to something you might want to pursue later. But I want to help people, or I want this group to be sort of a staging area for that work. So, the idea would be you'd work on it, you'd work on building a repository, building documentation, working on the code, and then presenting in this group and getting feedback. So I think that's useful. And it's a good experience. And then on top of that, we have a lot of the project management and other types of expertise, open source expertise, to help guide that project. So,
yeah, I would to be very to make it. I say yes to all that. So like basically, what's really going to determine what happens in this way is like, the more you can say, hey, I really like to work on this, and point out that it's relevant to a domain in the lab, that's going to help. We can, if you're really unsure or want to basically be told a specific thing to work on, like you can ask us about that, but like it will really be you making a selection. Like that's something that I do appreciate, having done a couple rounds of my own like internships and program stuff separate to this and involved in this too. The proposal part of Google Summer Code is really nice because you get the effort put into the proposal helps us. It's a proposal. It doesn't necessarily matter if you follow the proposal 100% or not. Like things tend to change, and that's great. But the quality of the proposal can indicate more. Okay, like there's something that's going to happen here, and you've thought about the process it's going to take. So the more you can present us with that, the better. And the easier it will be to support what you're doing. So that's my last piece about that. But yeah, happy to hear from anyone else with their updates. Also, hi more.
Yeah, so I actually asked suggestions from Jesse as well for some projects. So yeah, he gave me a link to the Bratenberg vehicles project, and I found it quite interesting. I was asking him some projects in Neuro AI or some cognitive science or embodied intelligence. So although I did not have much experience or in-depth knowledge about those, but I was willing to learn more. So yeah, I was asking suggestions from Jesse as well, and of course I liked your idea as well, which Bradley suggested, that the development and behavior of intelligent agents. So yeah, so I think I would like to know more about that. What is the idea on the part?
Yeah, so I mean that kind of work is interesting because we haven't like put it front and center for a while, but we do have a lot of open source resources on like the Bratenberg vehicle stuff. People have worked on different implementations of that. We have different other types of embodied models that we've been working on. And then we have this developmental AI roadmap, which kind of brings together a lot of that stuff. And if you read the papers associated with those areas and look at the repositories, you kind of get the sense of what what goes into the roadmap. So it's just a grab bag of different things that we've developed over the course of the past, like I think 6 or 7 years now.
Yeah.
where we have a number of different kind of components that fit in, and I'll have to work on the roadmap a little bit more because I think it's evolved quite a bit since its last presentation. So, but if you want to get in touch about this, we should talk maybe offline in more detail about what that project will look like. It's best to just kind of maybe fork off of something that's already there, and then work on something that's maybe focused, or if you have an idea for something, maybe you propose it, because it's the thing is, if you grab a huge piece of it, then it's harder to get kind of figure out what that repository will look like, what the contributions will look like. If you start maybe with a very small piece, it's maybe a little bit easier to build up. But again, the vision doesn't have to be coupled to the contributions. You can just start small and then say, I think I might want to go in this direction. And then, we can work together on the vision and, kind of the very fine grained details of what the contributions would look like.
Yeah, I would, you don't have to do this, but in my research coordinator, project manager, take action hat, I would say try to. It can be online; it's gonna be a full meeting, but try to say, "Hey, Bradley, can I talk to you next week about blank?" And set a time for us to talk about it. I can if it's something like brain brick vehicles, and there's a lot of stuff even in terms of this is more cognition futures adjacent, but like Avery's doing some things sort of the allostatic kinds and the sort of regulatory states, and some of it's multi-agent type stuff. So there's some existing things there that are appealing too, but like we have a rich proper developmental neurostimulation, brain brick vehicle, Rajput brain stuff that is like solidly there and exists already. So finding a time to talk about that would be good, and say, hey, let's talk about this. But I would say why I'm saying like the next week or so is because is it next week or the next couple of weeks? Like we're going to be out of the community period. We're going to be in the let's talk about your projects period. So I think that'll be the more we can have kind of once the train leaves the station on that. I think I would encourage people to kind of be like. We'll be in like project discussion mode, so the sooner we can sort that out. It's not really a hard deadline, but I think I would encourage that to happen sooner than later, if that makes sense. I don't know if you could, Bradley might disagree with that, but I'll be the person to say that for now.
We're already in the coding period for GSoC, but I don't think that's as relevant to people who aren't formally in the program because they're not on the same timeline. So, but I think at some point you want to get into something. So I think that's a good, and it's good to just kind of think about it before you leap into it and say, this is something I want to try to complete over the summer or you have a good foundation for now and see where that can go. And just, and then this is just an opportunity for people to have a community around what they're doing. That's beyond that, it's up to you how to kind of shape it and that sort of thing. Unless you're like a GSoC, formal GSoC student, in which case then you have tighter constraints. So yeah,
if somebody wants to, I would be happy to be a part of that meeting, next week with some kind of like reading guidance. If we're kind of, I assume we're talking about the developmental Bradenburg vehicles.
Yeah.
So I don't think I haven't seen much recently on that, but I'd be happy to read up the latest Tissue Talks, which is this great seminar series for tissue engineering. Had agent-based modeler at Georgia Tech talking about her work in relation to, you know, cancer and morphogenesis. You know, and I thought it was interesting because like she was using like net logo, you know, like really old tools.
Yeah.
You know, talking about, yeah, and you know, so it was kind of nice to see, you know, here's like, you know, an amazing researcher. There's a lot of opportunities, I think, in agent-based modeling to make some to make some progress. So yeah, curious. You know, I'm just looking at the I think your Medium post from like 2024. Just wondering if you've got any other things, but like we can follow up on Slack.
Right. Yeah. You'll have to remind me of what that post was.
I don't think there's any, like, for anyone wondering, like, I don't think there's really been any moving forward on the old projects. So, you know, there's is what you'll find in the post or in the repos. But, you know, yeah. You know, I don't want to. We may never talk about this again. So basically, only if someone's like, "Hey, I really want to work on that next week," we might talk about this. And you know, this isn't something that anybody has to work on. It's just it's come up this week. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, if you have things you want to discuss or ideas about things to pursue, let us know. And probably offline, we can have a richer discussion about it. But if you want to present something in the group, if it's just very loose and say, this is what I want to do, this is where I'm going to pick up my, you know, maybe I'm going to fork this repository and work on it, then that's something we'd like to see, I think. All right. So Barshan, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good. For this week, I was thinking like if you could push the dataset into the DevOps repo or wherever I can work on and like give my proceedings on, because that dataset is ready. I'm working like coding up the model, and I have to work on that itself for this week. So I can push the dataset in.
What data set is that?
The dataset with the epic, like I transformed it into the NumPy array,
Okay.
which will be used for the graph neural networks.
So this is something, it's a pull request now, or is it like just...
It's in my repo right now, so I can fork it and then I can put in a pull request.
Okay, that's good. Yeah. And then, yeah, that you've processed those data because it comes in a pretty raw form. And then...
Yeah, it's already processed, and like the epic dataset I've processed into the dataset that I need for my, like, to input into my model.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll do, pull requests, you know, kind of, I'll have to check it. And then we get, you know, I want to have like an update every week, maybe a pull request a week, if possible, because I don't want things to kind of sit around in one place. It's just basic backing up things. But yeah, and then that'll be, you know, we can talk about what that what constitutes the pull request, and then offline I'll accept the pull request.
Okay.
Yeah. So again, we have our medium. This is for the group, and this is the Orthogonal Research and Education Lab medium. And Barshan actually had me cross post this post, Attention in Developmental Biology. It's a question. And basically, this was something he presented in DevoWorm a couple months ago. And this is a list of papers where he talks about spatiotemporal AI and graph learning. So he has a Medium account, but you know, I kind of put his picture here as kind of like he didn't have a Medium account when I cross posted it. So we'll have to get him in as an author on this. But this is his post from his personal a blog here. Barshan is a dev, so that's you know, That's where this originally was published. And so he's got a nice post here on these papers and these different models. These are all relevant to his GSoC application. And it kind of walks through some of these, giving the pros and cons. And that's the post. So that's good. Thank you, Barshan, for that post. We also have other posts on here. We haven't posted in like 7 months, so I had posted some things earlier this year, but actually I have 3 posts this month, so it's good. But if you're interested in contributing to that, we can, either cross post content that you have on your blog, or we can, you can join Medium, make a profile, write the post on Medium, and then we can accept the post, and you'll have something to contribute to the lab as well.
Yeah, it's I'm finding it to be increasingly the more opportunities you get to do that kind of writing, the better. And even if it's from one perspective, it seems like, oh, okay, I'm writing a little post about something, but a lot of the process is getting used to doing it, and then the more you like, it will having these artifacts over time will help build credibility in an era where credibility is strange. So I encourage you to do it, and also like, it's perfectly fine to be, hey, I think I want to write a post about this, or like, let's say you're in the open source cohort and you're kind of thinking, okay, I've sorted out what to do, and I think I want to write a similar post to kind of cap or do it. In other times in the past, like, you'd have like a starting post or a starting presentation straight up on where you are. So you can ask about how to do that, but the first step will be kind of picking a topic, and like, like this, it can be a broad topic and not here's my project specifically. But even writing on that is good to do, and I think we're doing a lot more to offer that, and some things in Substack, and just getting you a place to write is, I think, an increasing. I've even seen that on like awards and things to entice people to come to like postdocs and things like that. They're increasingly mentioning all this stuff, like, oh, we'll feature you on this page and give you this writing opportunity, blah 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 blah. And it's like, okay, so it's good. It's a good thing to get started in.
Was this like for something you did, or?
Oh, I've seen it's kind of the time of year where I've seen a lot of oh, come join, do a PhD in blank, or here's a postdoc opportunity. I've heard I'm sharing a lot of them in just my personal LinkedIn, but like, just seeing how that's kind of evolving and who's using what, straight up PhD. If you're getting a PhD position, it's pretty well. It depends. It can be very centered on a project or a lab or more open, but like, there was I was looking at this thing that was like, hey, it was for like late PhD students to do a postdoc or some other thing in Singapore, and the way they presented it, I was like, oh, like, here, like, you'll be featured on this and you'll do this. I was like, what are the enticing things for folks to see or do, or be like, oh, we're savvy to this or aware of this. So yeah.
She's talking about the org. No, we haven't been able to do it yet. We're still working on it.
Yeah, we are actively pursuing some things, but unfortunately no. So that's a bummer.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. So that's good. Let's see. So I don't know if Utkarsh or Ashu had anything they wanted to add or talk about.
Hello,
Hi.
hi Brad. I'm audible?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just working with my GSoC project while I started the period. I'm planning to continue it. I have some ideas around it. I just wanted to discuss whether we'll be able to turn it into a paper and we can like maybe target some conference or something like that. So if you'll be fine, we can discuss in a meeting next week, like this listed.
Yeah, that's something that I'm very interested in, and we've done that in the years past. So that would be, definitely something we should work on. So your idea is to continue your proposal and try to work it into a paper. Yeah.
Actually, I had some variations from the proposal, which is why I wanted to have a meeting where I can discuss what I have done, like what I started with, and where am I right now.
All right. Yeah. Yeah. We'll have to.
Once you have that, you may be able to help me a bit more.
Yeah.
And maybe you'll be able to give your suggestions.
Yeah. Are you going to be able to kind of present that on Monday at the Developmental meeting, or? I mean, just
sure, I can do that.
Yeah,
I can do that on Monday.
Yeah, just the changes that you've made, like, or the current direction. It would just be like, you have probably a set of slides that you used for the project and that, and we talked about it. Just, change out some of the slides and say this is how I've changed it, and
yes, I'll prepare. Like I'll make some changes and prepare the presentation.
yeah. So, one of the things about GSoC projects is that like we do a lot of work, and then they kind of sit there after the period, after the summer, and the software is good, but it's like, we might produce a paper, and it's kind of like a proof of concept paper, and it needs to be maybe something where we run some experiments with it. And I know that seems like a lot of work, but it's like, that I think it's more interesting and maybe more publishable that way. So, I mean, thinking about like, this is a pipeline you're using, or this is an approach, and that's great to lay out, but like, what kinds of ideas can you test out in it? And I think, you've been working on that a little bit with some of the open worm people. And I think that's a good direction to go in, kind of thinking about, okay, what kinds of things can we do with this? What kinds of questions can we answer? But just like kind of, can we generate different scenarios, different simulations, and produce graphs and results that kind of confirm that? I think that's a good way to go. Especially since, the software is, sometimes you're like, I think with GSoC, they're teaching people how to create software, right? And so the whole gist of GSoC is to just create an artifact. And then, you create an artifact, and that's great. But then you want to be able to use it. And we've had this kind of issue, and I wouldn't say it's like a chronic issue, but it's sort of the style of things to kind of just create the artifact and then never use it again, or use it in a very limited fashion. So I would like to go, more in the direction of, can we use this for certain questions? Can we demonstrate how the software can be used?
Right.
Oh, Jess?
I was gonna say, yeah, and that's sort of kind of adjacent to the whole open source sustainability thing. But I think also to take it to the next level, like in terms of thinking about, one is like the product direction, which open source perhaps isn't necessarily going to do that, although some can. Like product, technology, startup, that's one path. But more broadly, like I think, and this is very me coded in some of my ideas and preferences, I think like the more you can target it to specific questions and sort of what in the problem space are you trying to address, and how does it alone. One of the most, like, a great experience I had when I went back to school and spent time in like a neuroscience lab, that different advisors have different strengths and so on. And I'm saying that in a very cautious way, because there was good and bad things. But one of the things I took away from this particular experience was like, and it's it's sort of like not quite full stack in this software sense, but like this full stack of like being able to take from the very small thing of what you're measuring or trying to do at a micro level to a medium, like how is this in a broad, what's going on at a slightly higher level towards like what's a problem area in general, towards like what's a huge big grand question or something that society cares about or like the topical space cares about, and like being able to comment the whole way up and down that scale of like micro to meso to macro. So like that isn't what we did, but it was cool to get exposure to what does that look like. And so when you're making Google Summer of Code is a fine thing to do for like learning how to make software, learning how to use GitHub, learning how to have versions and sort of loosely integrate with an organization and understand, get experience in how a group is handling a problem and what they're doing, and say, it's great to see like, hey, I like when people do things this way. I like this amount of hands off. I don't like this amount of hands off. I like this amount of, project, whatever. And hopefully you're developing an intuition of the things you want to do and work on in the future. But also like, I think there's this sort of a broader question of like, what are the actual, how do we, what GSoC doesn't necessarily teach you. It can, but it's not designed to do this. Like it's not the job of GSoC to do this. Is how do you either, what's the right amount of like having something that you can build on long term, or how do you pivot something to how do you either pivot something to focus on a longer term or other aims, or like what is the process of like, okay, here's a complete dead end, I'm going to drop it, versus how do we pivot, versus how do we actually build upon this or link it to other things. That's sort of like very hard work, and it's sort of this, not just they work, but like we kind of talked about this last time with like the advising and what kind of advice are you getting, at what point in your development are you getting it. But this is an interesting different, I don't know, this is an interesting different challenge that if you're always working in certain spaces where it's like a full if you're always in a situation where someone's setting the agenda for what you're supposed to be working on, it might not come up as much. And some corporate labs are that way, and you may not be really in a research and development type space about that, and that's fine. But there's the other side of the scale where it's like, okay, you're kind of setting the agenda or trying to explore very new things, and that kind of documentation and communication is different. So I could go on and on about that in different directions, but I'll defer to Bradley about where to turn things next. So,
yeah. So I mean, we had some pretty good conversations last Saturday about generative AI and ed tech and education. I thought that was a very good conversation. I know 2 weeks ago we had mentioned that we were going to do that, like, last week, and we ended up doing it in the Saturday meeting. So we did have that conversation. So I refer you to our YouTube channel where we have, I think I did an excerpt of that conversation. So you can look that up there. Thank you, Vidhi, for attending. And then, I think that's a good conversation to continue with. So I know that like Morgan is involved in that, and Jess, of course, is interested in that. I think it's a useful conversation for exactly the reason that Jesse was talking about. Like, not just in terms of how we use generative AI in some of the educational settings, but also, some of these other topics involving decision making and what kinds of projects to pursue and that sort of thing. So, if you have like people who are interested in working on something, that's great. sometimes you might have a team devoted to something, but sometimes you maybe have one person, and that's a different dynamic. And then generative AI comes into that in terms of being parts of those teams and things like that. Okay, so it looks like Morgan is back. I don't know, Morgan, did you have something you wanted to talk about?
Not in particular. If anybody, does have topics along the lines Bradley mentioned, please do reach out. I am trying to think about the CompuCell 3D workshop hackathon in August as a kind of both a time to do a deep dive on agent-based models and certainly cellular POTS models for tissue and developmental simulations. But around the as well as very 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 much trying to also using agentic coding to see both what it's capable of as well as how I can use it as an educational tool, or how it is changing the landscape in terms of both researching topics to work on, as well as obviously providing some sort of augmentation for directly working on those. So definitely topics that I'm really interested in, as well as some of the I still am sort of interested in the software development issues around software engineering at kind of large scales, with Fedora Linux packaging and some things that I've been doing, again using agentic tools, but to do to work on large projects, large group projects, and see what how those work, how you think about the testing and reporting issues. So the scikit-learn community and MNE, which is a big tool in EEG, they've got new processes around agentic coding. You can use agentic tools for code submissions. When you communicate about those with PRs and things like that,
Right.
it needs to be 100% human.
Right.
And which is a good line to draw, or we're it's don't yet move to the your agent can talk to my agent.
Yeah.
Right. And anyway, if any of those are interesting topics, please get in touch, and happy to talk more about them, and certainly happy to support anybody, and if they've got questions about their projects.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you, Morgan. Yeah, Morgan is involved in the world of Linux, Fedora Linux specifically. So I think it's Neurofedora. Are you involved in that directly?
Yeah. I started that with another packager, and I was just copying NeuroDebian,
Right.
which is a project that's widely used in the neuroimaging world. My lab and MGH, Harvard, MIT both use CentOS, and so it was kind of it was again one of these typical hacker selfishness things where it's just hey, I want I want my changes to be upstream, to go upstream of the distros that I have to use, right? So CentOS is also a Red Hat based distro. But it is interesting to see, you know, if you are interested in medical device development, how that kind of software, gets built in when it falls under regulatory scrutiny. There's lots you can learn from being involved in the kind of kitware ecosystem, and so this is it's together with like trying to package on Fedora. You can actually learn a lot about software engineering in a kind of project based way. So if anybody wants to get involved with that too, you can check out my my copper. That's like my PPA, in the Debian world. Yeah.
Yeah, great. That sounds great. Thank you. Thank you for that. So yeah, if you're interested in that sort of thing, Morgan is the person to talk to about that. We also, I think it was last week or the week before, we had some interesting conversations in DevoWorm, which is on the DevoWorm YouTube channel, about agent-based like ecosystems. So there's the Claw Archive, which is a place where agents will publish papers, and then they're peer reviewed by other agents, which sounds a little bit like circuitous, but they basically, they'll produce a write up, and then the write up will be reviewed by other agents. And this was facilitated by someone in the group who presented on their work to a hackathon in India, where they used agents basically to build the project, and then they wanted to see how well it would work. So we talked about that at length in the meeting, and kind of the pitfalls of doing that, and some of the advantages of doing that, maybe. So that was, I think it was Mahul, who's a former GSoC student, and he worked on this with another person, and it was a learning experience, to be sure.
Yeah. I think he said there were some issues.
Yes, as you might expect, but it's the whole point, of course, was to try to see how that works, that whole pipeline.
Exactly. Yeah, I think it's interesting. Again, these are systems that are certainly capable if given a loop, and kind of if you're not too worried about your token usage.
Yeah, well,
you can get you can drive these systems towards particular goals, which is already right. I mean, it's also already interesting from a a developmental standpoint.
Yeah.
It is still something where there's the way the systems miss those targets, or the solutions that they fall upon to satisfy their targets are interesting, but are not what we intended, right?
Right.
And so it's still I was I've been trying this agentic SciML project that comes out of Brown, the same group that gave us physics informed neural networks. And again, it's these team software teams doing scientific software development. Again, it's interesting to see their conversations. It's interesting to see the kind of cul-de-sacs that they can find themselves in. or like they can, if unmonitored, you can find that they're debating the wrong problem at a high level.
Right.
And it's it's but still really interesting area to be learning from in this time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's interesting, especially since like we think of like goal directedness and agency as part of cognition. And like, if you're saying that agents have cognition, then what are they? I mean, you're obviously they can't do it on their own very well, but people can drive the agent towards that. And so then the question is, it's really just kind of a hybrid or an augmented system. And so how does that work? I like to use the example of hybrid chess, which is something that emerged after Garry Kasparov was beaten by Deep Blue in 1997. And so, they turned around and started using AI agents as like a way to help humans play better chess. And there would be like this strategy where they would leverage each other's strengths. And, that was it became a set of strategies. And you can go back and look at how people did that. And it's kind of, I think, a good sort of guiding light for maybe what people are doing with agents now, in coding, especially. Yeah. So that's good. Thank you, Morgan. I wanted to give Jess a little bit of an opportunity. Maybe he wants to talk about a project management topic or something.
Whew. I don't have anything directly in my mind. I can certainly, if anybody wants to pop something, they can. But I don't have a to-go delivery right now.
Okay.
But if you want, we can go in many directions. But otherwise, I'm sure you might have things that you would
Oh,
want to say.
I actually am going to do something, but Barshan would like to say something. You're muted, Barshan.
So I wanted to ask if there are any blogs or anything about making presentation or storytelling better, which are available in the internet, or having those soft skills areas to be enhanced. Someone to follow in a YouTube maybe.
Do you want to start with that, Bradley, or do you want me to?
You can do it. Yeah.
So, I'm reminded of. I think I made a loose promise last Google Summer of Code to. It was an adjacent question and topic, and we talked about it a little bit, but I don't think I fully published like the presentation or whatever I made, because someone asked, how do you deal with presenting your topic to a mixed audience, like as mixed audience of expertise level, like if you have like hold on, some of my screen, sorry. Oof. Sorry, like the question was like, how do you deal with people, like an audience that maybe is totally public and then a few experts, or like a few like PhD plus people, and then when I think the short answer of that was sort of, especially if you're speaking to a room, like really just ask, like, how many people have blank, like get the feedback so then you can tailor the level you want. But there's a lot more to that. To answer your question about storytelling, there's a classic paper in the lab about, it was more about paper writing, but there's a little like adjacent work. I think it's like Conrad Cording's 10 steps to writing a great paper. And there's also like things that are adjacent to making presentations. Like one was like context, content, conclusion, like the 3 C's of that stuff. There's stuff out there, but I don't know that we have. I know Bradley has some coursework that might be adjacent, but I don't know that I don't think we've internally published anything about like storytelling or specific parts of that. So I feel like we have a lot to say, but I don't know that I can point to anything directly that we've done. There's other people I can mention, like the only other thing I'll say before turning to Bradley or Morgan or anybody else that wants to comment is like, I think, do I want to use the word taste here? I don't know. The word taste creeps me out. On a personal side note, people talk about, taste and like computers and AI stuff. Like, I don't really know what that means. I sort of do, but then like when I try to use it or use it in a serious way, I don't know. So I don't know if I want to use the word taste here or not, but I think the real answer is getting intuition for the problem space as a whole and realizing where different stakeholders fit in and what they care about. I think, for example, I mention this maybe more often than I need to here, but I'm also fresh off of a lot of experiences in like the startup pitching venture capital space. And that is definitely not a space everybody here needs to master or should speak in. But why I'm mentioning it is it gets such a great encapsulation of it's really clear. It's clear in one way and very obscure in another. But like your goals for communicating to those audiences are different. If you're pitching to a program that already cares about your stuff, if you're pitching to a venture capitalist investor, if you're having an elevator pitch to talk to people who you're finding someone you don't know if they're like Mr. Moneybags trying to invest in your product or some random person, how do you even gauge that conversation as his own skill set, right? And that's, if you're talking about this from a academic standpoint, I would strongly recommend everybody here look at something called expert writing, because and there's some really good Larry McInerney Chicago stuff on YouTube, and I'm trying to make stuff here, but like this is sort of adjacent to Barshan's original question, but expert writing is specifically about how to deal with the fact that you as an academic person, which probably most of us are, and most of our experience writing and communicating is to professor, and is basically saying, hey, you have to understand that whole mode of communication is because you're paying someone to give a care about why you're writing about it, and they're going to judge it based off of how much are you regurgitating what they're kind of telling you to focus on. The real world does not work that way, and that affects grants, that affects getting published or like writing for magazines, shaping different audiences and so on. So I think Larry's coursework, it's a bit older. It's not really from the AI era as we know it, but there's derivatives, and like I think that's a core skill. Like a lot of the stuff I'm working with GeoPro or other like training and mentoring programs, like that's a definite pillar of like you have to understand you've been kind of trained in a bubble of communication, and a lot of the incredibly intelligent expert writing is called expert writing because how do you as an expert in perhaps a very niche space that the rest of the world may not really give a care about at all, translate that into things. So that's a great resource. And then to kind of zoom back out and come back to the current, conversation broadly, getting the taste or just the intuition of what different, another thing from expert writing is, I forget what he calls it, but identifying sort of these clusters of experts or where the discussion, who is shaping the discussion right now, and seeing how that discussion isn't just a brick over time. It's a static thing where there's certain people in the domain space asking really interesting questions, shaping the discussion. And it doesn't mean that they're to contextualize this somewhat. You may know the concept of AI summers and winter. This ebbs and flows of development and interest and focus. Like there was a big take on like symbolic logic and the expert system, and then there was nobody cares about that anymore. Linguistics, and nobody cares about that, and then deep learning, and now it's like big blow up of deep learning and LM and big data. But the crux and the nexus of that conversation, if you asked what is AI now versus 10, 20, 30 years ago, it's not a fixed target. it's a dynamic moving thing. So learning what is that for your domain space, and who are the actors and who are the things. This is kind of adjacent to what a frontier map project is supposed to help you figure out, like this tool that I've been in development forever and haven't really publicly released much. But frontier mapping is basically, how do you understand what that is and the trajectory of that some of those spaces are. So I think that that shapes, that's sort of the meta context and meta information of how do you apply the skills that Barshan asked about, like knowing how to do it in storytelling. And then it's like you're getting the context for the audience, I think, is sort of the other thing that facilitates that. So that's my opening take. I'm sure Bradley has things to say about that.
I think you covered it. That's all I have to say.
There you go, I covered it.
Yeah.
That's all you need.
So is that good, Barshan?
But go ahead, Barshan. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so I'll just look into the expert writing and the frontier mapping.
Yeah, I mean, you won't see that much about frontier extra writing, but then also, like, what I would encourage you to do, look around and post something in the Google Summer Code Slack. Say, hey, I found this that kind of does it, and that will help us also steer resources that might be particularly useful to you, because you're you know, it would be very easy to talk about many different details within the broader question you had. So I'm happy to maybe follow up on that next time, where it's like, hey, I'm interested in specifically, like a great, like science communication. I think like Ed Yong, like there's a lot of great people who do storytelling in science, but it depends on kind of at what level. So anything specific about that would be good, and a nice thing we can build upon for other discussions too. So.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for that. That was good. I will probably finish up here very quickly with some articles that I've collected. So we've been talking about sort of this, I guess you could say, specter of AI generated code and AI generated pull requests on GitHub. So one of the things we did experience this spring in the OLM project was that people were issuing pull requests, and those pull requests were, kind of overwhelming the maintainers, right? So like, it wasn't necessarily that it was AI generated. It was just that, like, for some reason, people were generating so much code that you were getting like this bottleneck where people had to go and evaluate the code. Because usually the way a pull request works is that an open source organization will have a maintainer. That maintainer will have a set of pull requests that are assigned to them. And then they'll go through them one by one and inspect them. Sometimes some orgs will give more, sometimes they'll just go through a number of cursory checks and then they'll accept the pull request. Other times they'll want to have a conversation with the contributor and say, this is what we want to change, or this is what, maybe we want to sculpt your contribution a little bit. It really depends on the culture of the organization. But anyways, so this is an article from the New Stack. These are just like articles from the internet. And this is talking about how open source maintainers in a lot of open source organizations are drowning in AI generated pull requests. So the idea here is that, agents and agentive coding have allowed people to generate lots of code and then commit that or issue a pull request to an open source organization. And so that's, it seems like it would be a good thing because you can solve a lot of problems that way. And sometimes you could, if your organization maybe had very specific guidelines for using this, or if you had very specific goals for using it. But a lot of times people will just kind of casually come in and generate a pull or issue a pull request that is a lot of generated code that needs to be inspected and gone through and commented on. one of the problems that has always really kind of plagued a lot of open source organizations is that there are these low quality pull requests that appear. And sometimes they're out of scope, and sometimes they're just not very well thought out. This is why I've said, if you want to start an open source project, a lot of times you have to think about where you want to go. You have to kind of have a mindset even before you write code as to what you want to do. What are your aims? What do you want to solve? What is the code going to look like? What is the repository going to look like? And sometimes you don't do that, and it's okay, but it makes it a lot better for you in the future. So this has been a persistent problem, but AI is making this far worse. And so the sub title of this article is AI is flooding open source with low quality pull requests. And then it says learn how enterprise teams can avoid burnout by fixing the code validation bottleneck. So code validation bottleneck is where you have maybe one maintainer, or you have maybe a couple of maintainers, and then they're getting all of these pull requests they have to go through, and they have to verify the quality, or they have to verify that the code works, or whatever your standards are in your organization. And you can think about this in terms of code review as well. So if you're doing code review in your organization, you have maybe one person who does the code review, or you have maybe in a team. And if you're generating huge amounts of code, it's going to take that much longer to get through your code reviews and move on to the next step of the project. So this is a nice article. It sort of poses this issue and talks about the problem and talks about how maybe we can overcome it. So over the past year, open source maintainers have been overwhelmed by a flood of low quality AI generated pull requests, verbose changes with nonsensical descriptions, contributors that submitters cannot explain when questioned, code that looks plausible on the surface but crumbles under review. So these are all just kind of like things that are generated that people haven't verified before issuing the pull request. So you can see right there, maybe one solution is that contributors should work in that sort of hybrid way or augmented way where they're going through the code before they even issue the pull request, and not putting the burden on the organization, but making sure that these things work and they understand their code before issuing the pull request. So, and there are examples of organizations that have shut down their contribution systems, such as the Jazz Band Collective. Its lead maintainer cited the unsustainable volume of AI-generated spam pull requests and issues as the primary driver. So issues can also be an issue or a problem where if you generate too many issues, you can also create a problem in a similar fashion. Basically creating issues maybe that don't make any sense, or maybe, it's slicing the salami too thin. That is, you're maybe creating 5 issues when one issue would do the job, and that sort of thing. Remy Verscheld, who maintains the Godot game engine, has described triaging AI slop as draining and demoralizing. So triaging is just a strategy in project management you use when you have so many things going on. You have to just kind of move around and kind of fix the broken things, the most broken things first, and then the next most broken things, which is not the best strategy. But when you're overwhelmed like that, sometimes you have to do that. Daniel Steinberg, the creator of curl, has canceled bug bounty programs because they become magnets for low effort AI submissions. So that's another problem, is that one of the most famous successes of open source, which are these bug bounty programs, are being impacted, which is bad because it's affecting the quality of open source, but we can, I think, overcome this. So the pattern is consistent. Maintainers spend a disproportionate share of their time evaluating code that should never have been submitted, crowding out the genuine contributions and accelerating burnout. So then they just talk about this throughput asymmetry, where AI coding agents have made code generation dramatically cheaper and faster. So a developer working with an agent can produce 5, 6, or more pull requests a day, but then you have to think about the other end. You have to think about the maintainer. And the maintainer needs to go through the code and go through the sort of the due diligence that the organization has set out. So it's not just a matter of saying, I can check this really quickly because you can generate it really quickly. It's that I have a certain pace that I need to work at because we have standards we need to meet. And if you're generating way too much code, it just takes us that much longer to do the review, and it takes a lot more attention, and it leads to burnout, I guess, is the message here. And sometimes, things can look plausible but aren't. That's what they're trying to detect. They're trying to detect those false positives. And that's really the problem. As one contributor put it, if that were really what maintainers wanted, they could do it themselves. So the value of a contribution was never just the code. It was the understanding behind it, the testing it validated it, and the human judgment that shaped it. And so then that's kind of the perspective from open source. Then they talk about enterprise teams, which is where you really kind of have to think about this, kind of as a pipeline. And if you accelerate the front of the pipeline, but you keep the back of the pipeline sort of small, then that's where your problem lies. So you have two solutions, actually three. The first is to shrink back down that beginning of the pipeline, meaning that you just don't generate as much code, or you don't pull requests as much code. You don't push as much code. The second is to widen the pipeline on the back end, which is where you use maintainers. Maybe maintainers do use automation to check the pull requests, which is something that can be done, but also maybe accept fewer pull requests, have higher standards. The third option is to kind of work, with contributors and maintainers in an automated fashion, kind of integrate all of that and kind of figure out how, a good strategy for that. So one thing we don't want to do is have the reviewer inherit the full burden of determining whether the code actually works, integrates correctly, handles edge cases, and does not introduce regressions. So a research from Agoda found that experienced developers were actually 19% slower when using AI tools, largely due to what researchers described as comprehension debt, in which developers understand less of their own code base over time as AI-generated code accumulates. So that's kind of a version of technical debt, as comprehension debt, meaning that you don't understand the code that you're writing, or you don't understand it as well because you're generating more code. And so that's basically the idea. And so this is a figure here that just kind of shows the pipeline. And, if you're just kind of pointing an agent at an open issue, the agent generates code and submits a pull request. That can take like 5 to 10 minutes. But then, of course, if you're from the perspective of the maintainer, you're trying to triage these pull requests and verify the intent of the pull requests. You need to maybe use something like continuous integration to check the code, but that still doesn't mean that the code works in every case. You need to be able to then do a detailed code review, ideally, so that you understand what's going on. And all of that can take much longer, 60 to 90 minutes. So if you add that up over the number of pull requests you might receive in a month, that's a lot of disparity there. And so that is our pipeline, and, where we have a huge pipe at the front end of the pipeline and a small pipe at the back end of the pipeline. And as you know from pipes, they overflow. So this is a crisis that is, we're trying to maybe solve using different approaches. And then I have a couple of other articles here. I'll just very quickly talk about those. This is an article on AI vibe coding threatening open source as maintainers face a crisis. That's basically the same idea. It kind of talks more about this crisis and talking basically about the same issues. And so this is just kind of, I found a number of articles on this. In this case, it's vibe coding, where people are just using an agent kind of willy-nilly. There's no strategy behind it. So that's understandable. If you're doing like more formal agentive coding, then the issue becomes more volume than like maybe the actual slop part of it. And then there's this article from InfoWorld, is AI killing open source? And basically the larger angst here is that a lot of this stuff is contributing to the collapse of open source organizations, or the collapse of coding, or the collapse of the workflow that leads to successful contributions. And so open source has never been about a sprawling community of contributors. Most of the software we all depend on is maintained by a tiny core of people, so it's this bottleneck. And then this is something that is overwhelming to these organizations. And so that's what they're getting at in here. And then they talk a little bit about maybe some of the solutions. So tightening up pull request controls, or just rejecting things outright. Sometimes you just use a brute force method and you say anything that's AI generated, we'll reject it. But that's, of course, not fair to things that are very good contributions. So that's a problem. Tightening up standards is works sometimes, but then again, that requires more quality control on the side of the contributor. So maybe you'd get fewer contributors that way, and it would kill open source from another direction. So this is, kind of thinking about who this is affecting in the open source community. And a lot of times this affects the small open source projects the most, or it hits them the hardest. And this piece here, which I won't talk about, the fate of small open source, talks about this phenomena in the context of this project blobutil. And blobutil was a staple for like about a decade because it was easier to install the library than to write the utility functions yourself. But in the age of agentive coding, why would you take on a dependency? You can simply ask your AI to write a utility function, and it'll spit out a perfectly serviceable snippet in milliseconds. So now that calls into question the very existence of this project, or the very utility of this project, which, you could argue that maybe this project has some utility beyond, being able to generate a tool, a very simple tool. So there, it's not just this pipeline issue or this throughput issue. It's also sort of thinking about the utility of these projects and how they are impacted by the ability to generate code for, maybe very niche things. So I see that Jesse's really been making some notes here. Jess says, a note later on escalation theory from evolution studies and its relationship to open source.
I don't know how much time we have left, but I can make a comment on that or just hold it.
We might hold it. Yeah, I want to go through the comments here. Then Barshan says, does this pose a danger to open source communities or programs like GSoC in the future? Well, GSoC, certainly there was a little bit of a mini crisis amongst the project leads this year, and just being overwhelmed by it, a lot of the contributions. I think maybe, people will figure out ways to solve this problem, but it's going to take some time. So we'll see how this works out.
Yeah. I don't just jiggle some more code. I don't think it's going to close down just this. It's too much heft and power, and they'll do it as long as people want to do it, and the orgs are going to want to do it because they get labor and money and resources and stuff. Like there's too much benefit.
Yeah.
But I do think it, like I said in the chat, I said that the market will adjust. I do think it's been on many levels. This is that's basically my final comment, or my last. The macro problem of 2020 is this is sort of happening a lot of things. I'm a college football fan, and this is a totally different subject, but the way money has gone into the sport now, and there's not in the NFL or other major league sports, there's a little bit more regulation of certain things. But in these environments that are kind of, for those that don't know, college sports is a little bit. There's hundreds of teams and different regions and conferences. So there's, and it may be a little bit more open source space. There's kind of this lack of coherent regulation or like things are much more in flux. So as such, we're dealing with now the AI is meeting this, like it's so easy to apply, like the bug bounty is a great example, and so let's go back to escalation theory very quickly. It's like we're dealing with this situation where there's certain pressure, like we now have to spend a lot more energy optimizing on defending against this, and maybe we can find a nice solution that will be like, oh, we'll just blanketly apply this sort of new convention or new protocol or new standard. We the collective society will have solved AI slop, which again I always think about my guy Sam Altman being like, oh yeah, society's just gonna get used to there being a lot of fake videos about you now. And like, that's where we are. It's like, okay, we don't have that, but maybe it will happen at large. It's certainly a challenge on many fronts, all kind of applications, and especially when people are offering money. It's a very interesting pressure on submissions in general, not just pull requests. So, but there are solutions. So anyway, let's move on. Yeah.
All right. So I think that's it for today. If you have more comments, I know this is always facilitates a lot of discussion, but we can do it in the Slack.
Yeah, I think it was a great set of articles to bring up. So I'm happy to continue discussion next week or in the Slack too.
Yeah. Okay. See you next week. Thank you.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Take care.